The sands of Africa whisper with secrets of a forgotten campaign. In the winter of 46 BC, Rome's greatest general, Gaius Julius Caesar, crossed the sea not as a conqueror, but as a man hunted by fate. Behind him lay the ashes of civil war. Before him, the red soil of North Africa, where Pompey's loyalists gathered like ghosts refusing to die. But what truly happened on those desolate plains near Ruspina? Why did Caesar, the man who crushed Gaul and seized Rome itself, find himself surrounded, outnumbered, and on the brink of annihilation? The chronicles tell us one story, the Vatican vaults perhaps another. Hidden among the ancient archives of Rome are whispers, letters, reports, and dispatches sealed by the pontiffs, describing a campaign unlike any other, one where Rome's destiny teetered on the edge of oblivion, one where Caesar nearly vanished into the sands, his victory buried beneath the silence of history. The Battle of Ruspina is more than a military tale. It is a shadow war between legend and truth, between what was written and what was erased. In early January 46 BC, Caesar landed near Hadrumetum with barely a handful of men. His legions, once invincible, were scattered across the Mediterranean. His treasury was empty, his cavalry minimal, and his enemy, Metellus Scipio, supported by King Juba of Numidia, awaited him with tens of thousands of men, battle-hardened and eager for revenge. The African sun was merciless, the wind sharp with desert sand. Caesar's army starved under the glare of the gods. Supplies were scarce, morale was low, and yet Caesar pressed forward, because he was not just a man of flesh, he was an idea that Rome's fate was bound to his will. But what the records don't tell you is that Caesar's African campaign was cursed from the beginning. In the Commentarii de Bello Africo, the official account attributed to Caesar's officers, there are missing pages, sudden breaks in continuity, mentions of dark omens, phantoms in the dunes, and a great silence before the slaughter. What did they see on those African nights? What was so dreadful that Rome's historians refused to record it? Some claim the answers lie within the Vatican's secret archives, beneath centuries of papal locks, in a section once known as the Archivum Prohibitum. There, among letters from emperors and saints, are said to be scrolls recovered from Caesar's African camps. One speaks of a night when the desert wind carried the cries of the dead from the Battle of Pharsalus. Another describes soldiers disappearing during sandstorms, vanishing without a trace. Yet these documents have never been shown to the public. The church denies their existence. The archives remain silent, and so the truth sleeps. As Caesar marched inland, his scouts brought grim news. Titus Labienus, his former lieutenant, once his right hand in Gaul, now commanded the enemy cavalry. Labienus knew Caesar's every tactic, every deception. He was the ghost of Caesar's past, the betrayal made flesh, and at Ruspina, their destinies would collide. The morning of January 4th dawned with pale light over the dunes. Caesar's army formed ranks near the shore, barely 8,000 infantry, a few hundred cavalry, and the sea at their backs. Ahead, a vast dust cloud signaled the approach of Labienus, Numidian horsemen and light infantry. 10-1, they outnumbered Caesar's men. The sea wind howled, shields rattled. Somewhere in the crowd, a veteran murmured that the gods had abandoned them, and perhaps they had. The battle began not with a charge, but with a trap. Labienus unleashed his cavalry in waves, feigning retreat, drawing Caesar's line deeper and deeper into the open plain. Then, from all sides, the Numidian slingers encircled them, stones and javelins raining like locusts. Caesar's men bled beneath a storm of dust and death. The formation wavered. The desert echoed with screams. But Caesar stood firm, his crimson cloak whipping in the wind, his face carved in defiance. He ordered his men into a tight, double-front formation, facing both directions, shields locked. A living fortress against the tide. For hours the Romans fought surrounded, their ranks shrinking by the minute. It was no ordinary battle. It was survival, brutal, desperate, primal. And above them the vultures circled, waiting for Rome's master to fall. Some later wrote that Caesar himself was struck during the fight, that his blood darkened the sand of Ruspina. Others say he vanished briefly amid the chaos, only to reappear, shouting commands like a man possessed. In one ancient marginal note, found in a 16th century manuscript, now sealed in the Vatican's restricted collection, a scribe claimed that the general saw an omen in the smoke. What that omen was, no one knows, but after Ruspina, Caesar's tone in his writings grew darker, more fatalistic. It was as if he had glimpsed something beyond victory, something inevitable. As the sun set, Caesar's army managed to withdraw in grim silence. The sand was soaked in Roman blood, but somehow they had survived. Ruspina was no triumph. It was a warning, a shadow of the disasters to come. And yet, in Rome, the event was barely mentioned. Official records glossed over the defeat. Dispatches were edited. Witnesses disappeared. Centuries later, when the Vatican began preserving imperial documents, some historians claim a sealed collection labeled De Africa Occulta, the hidden Africa, was quietly transferred into the papal archives. Inside, it said, were reports describing phenomena not of this world witnessed by Caesar's troops. A myth, perhaps, or a truth Rome was never ready to tell. What if Ruspina was more than a battle? What if it was the moment Caesar realized he could not control fate, that even he, the man who crossed Rubicons and rewrote destiny, was a pawn in something larger, older, and darker than empire? The night after Ruspina was silent, too silent. The desert winds that had howled all day now fell to a whisper, as if even nature held its breath. Caesar walked alone among the wounded, the flickering light of campfires reflecting off his armor like dying stars. His men slept in uneasy silence, haunted by the ghosts of the fallen. Some claimed they heard whispers in the dunes, Latin words carried on the wind, though no living tongue had spoken them. The veterans crossed themselves, muttering prayers to old gods long abandoned. But Caesar listened. And when he raised his gaze toward the horizon, his eyes carried the weight of prophecy. They say power changes men, but war unmakes them. In those cold African nights, Caesar began to write again. His notes, later copied into the Commentary de Bello Africo, were brief, precise, stripped of emotion. Yet in the margins of one damaged copy, recovered from a monastery in Avignon, scholars found words scratched faintly into the parchment. The desert remembers. No Roman chronicler ever explained what that meant. But the Vatican's archivists, centuries later, catalogued an unmarked scroll beneath the section labeled For Caesaris Africa. Its ink had long faded, yet under ultraviolet light, fragments could be ready. They came from the sands, not men, not gods, shadows of the old kings. Was it metaphor? Madness. Or something Rome chose to bury? Caesar's army was starving. Supplies from Sicily were delayed, and Numidian horsemen cut off every road. The men resorted to eating roots and stale grain soaked in seawater. Disease spread, and yet against all reason, Caesar refused to retreat. Better to die on foreign soil than crawl back in shame, he said. But beneath that iron resolve was fear, a fear that history would remember him not as conqueror, but as failure. The African campaign became a mirror of his soul, brilliant, ruthless, but decaying from within. And still, the Vatican's secretaries would later copy fragments of letters between Roman officers, letters that spoke of visions. Fire in the dunes, one wrote. Faces in the storm? Centuries later, When the papal librarian Angelo Mai uncovered these references in the early 19th century, he was ordered to destroy the notes, but he didn't. He hid them within the index of the Codex Vaticanus. Even today, their full contents remain unreleased. Meanwhile, Caesar's enemies gathered strength. Scipio, fortified by the armies of Juba, waited inland, his banners fluttering black and red beneath the desert sun. Labienus, ever the shadow of Caesar's past, hunted his every move. Ruspina had shown Rome's master could bleed. Now his foes intended to finish what the sands had started. Yet, history has a way of bending around men like Caesar. When all seemed lost, his supply ships finally arrived, cutting through storm-tossed waves to reach the shore. The soldiers wept as grain poured from their hulls, bread, at last, for the starving legions. Caesar's face softened, if only for a moment. He gathered his men, addressed them with quiet fire, and promised revenge not in words, but in destiny. "They think the gods favor them," he said. "Let them. We are the gods who made flesh." The army cheered, but those who stood close to him noticed something else, a flicker of unease, the same haunted look he wore after Ruspina. That night he dreamt again. His aides later said he woke shouting the name, Pharsalus, as if reliving the battle where he destroyed Pompey, the man whose followers he now fought. But others whispered he saw something else, an image of himself crowned in laurel, standing atop a pyramid of bones, the desert around him burning like a sunless inferno. In a letter attributed to one of his officers, preserved in a sealed collection of the Vatican Library, there's a cryptic line, "Our general has seen his fate, and he fears not the gods, but what comes after them." The authenticity of this letter remains unproven, but the implication is chilling. As Caesar marched toward Thapsus, his tactics changed. He fought not for survival, but with a strange, fatal calm, as though he knew the outcome, as though some invisible hand guided him toward an end only he could see. The priests in his army warned him of omens, a comet sighted at dawn, a vulture perched upon a standard, the moon turning blood red over the camp. He dismissed them with a smile, yet his eyes betrayed him. The campaign that began as a war for Rome's soul was now something darker. The Roman gods had gone silent, and Caesar marched beneath a new won destiny. And in the quiet halls of the Vatican, among parchments that no mortal eye has read for centuries, one document bears a final, unsettling annotation, written centuries after Caesar's death, in the hand of a medieval archivist. Africa consumed him not in body, but in spirit. The sands took what Rome could not. The final march began beneath a burning sky. Caesar's legions, hardened by hunger and haunted by ghosts, moved inland toward Thapsus. Behind them, the dunes of Ruspina shimmered like the surface of another world, an open grave for those who had vanished into its silence. Ahead lay the last stand of the Republic's remnants, Scipio, Labienus, and King Juba. Together they commanded over 60,000 men. Caesar had half that number. Yet his soldiers no longer feared death. They had seen it in the sand, heard its whispers in the night. Now they followed it. The battle at Thapsus was swift, merciless, and final. When the elephants charged, Caesar's men did not break. Trumpets screamed, spears shattered, and the earth trembled beneath the weight of dying beasts. Within hours, the Republican army collapsed, its leaders fleeing or falling on their own swords. King Juba and Scipio perished, their blood soaking into the same soil that had once defied Caesar at Ruspina. Rome's master had conquered Africa, but not himself. In the aftermath, Caesar wandered the battlefield in silence. His officers recorded that he seemed distant, detached, as though the victory meant nothing. One soldier swore he saw him kneel beside a dying elephant, whispering words no one understood. In the official record, this detail was erased, but in the Vatican's sealed Codex Bellum Africum, there is a faint annotation. Written centuries later, he spoke to the creature as if it were an oracle. When the campaign ended, Caesar ordered no triumph, no grand parade, no golden laurel. Instead, he returned to Rome quietly, carrying with him something unseen, a heaviness, a shadow that clung to him like a curse. Those close to him noted strange behaviors. He avoided temples, dismissed augurs, and spent long nights staring into flame. His physicians blamed exhaustion. His enemies whispered madness. But perhaps Caesar had glimpsed something on those African plains, something that stripped the illusion of control from even the mightiest of men. Years later, when his blood stained the steps of the theatre of Pompey, some said it was not betrayal that killed him, but destiny fulfilling its ancient debt. For in the desert, fate had already marked him, and deep beneath Rome, within the labyrinthine halls of the Vatican archives, lies the final trace of that prophecy. In a sealed chest marked Africa Vitius rests a collection of fragments, letters, maps, and one peculiar bronze amulet discovered near ancient Ruspina. Its engraving depicts a serpent devouring its own tail, encircling the words Roma in Eternum, Rome eternal, yet inscribed along the edge, invisible to the naked eye, are words in Numidian script, translated only once by a forgotten Jesuit scholar. The conqueror is conquered. After his discovery, that scholar, Father Nickelvery, disappeared. His notes were confiscated, his name struck from the archives. The official record lists his death as unremarkable, as though the desert had claimed another soul, and so the truth remains buried. Was Ruspina merely a battle, or the moment the gods themselves turned away from Caesar? Did the Vatican preserve the final testament of a man who realized that no empire, no power, could stand against the will of time? The answers sleep beneath locks and seals, guarded by silence and centuries. Somewhere in the dim corridors of the Archivum Secretum, under the dust of forgotten ages, lies the echo of Caesar's African war. Not the one written in marble and triumph, but the one carved in fear and blood. Perhaps one day the Church will unseal those doors. Perhaps we will finally rid what Rome tried to forget. Until then, the desert keeps its secrets. The wind carries whispers of a conqueror who met his shadow on the sands of Africa. And when night falls over the ruins of Ruspina, the air still hums with the same question that haunted Caesar himself. What if victory was never the prize, only the warning? If history teaches us anything, it's that even the greatest conquerors can't escape the shadows they cast. Caesar won Africa, but lost something deeper, something the sands still keep buried. What else lies hidden beneath Rome's silence? What truths sleep behind the locked doors of the Vatican, waiting for the light? Maybe the greatest battles aren't fought with swords or legions, but with secrets. If you felt the weight of this story, the mystery, the silence, the power history tried to forget, then step deeper into the shadows with us. Subscribe to our Unsolved History. Turn on the bell and join us as we uncover the buried truths of empires, kings, and faith itself. Because the past isn't dead, it's only waiting to be found.